Hey everybody, it's Lori, and I'm here with my June 2019 reading wrap up. I read 12 books in the month of June, and I have a few of them here. I did have quite a few audiobooks and library books this month, and one that just wandered off and got lost somewhere in the house and I can't find. So I'll just go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start off with my children's books and middle grade books that I read. Two of them are children's classics that I listen to. We listened to Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers, narrated by Sophie Thompson. Um, and it was interesting because Mary Poppins in the book is a lot more vain and a lot meaner than Mary Poppins in the movie, which is all I am familiar with. And it's been years and years since I've watched Mary Poppins. But it did make me want to finally get around to watching the movie Saving Mr. Banks. And also, it makes me want to watch the movie as well. And maybe the new Return of Mary Poppins Returns movie or whatever. Okay, it's not super new. It's on Netflix. It's new on Netflix. So I might do those sometime soon. So I gave Mary Poppins 4 stars. I also listened to A Bear Called Paddington. Now, Mary Poppins I listened to in the car with 4 girls, and A Bear Named Paddington I listened to by myself because I was tired and didn't feel like reading. But A Bear Called Paddington is by Michael Bond, and it was narrated by Stephen Fry. And when I did my favorite narrators video a while ago, I do enjoy Stephen Fry, and so I had noticed that he narrated A Bear Called Paddington. And so when I was looking through our digital library for audiobooks that would be good with kids in a car for a swim meet, I wanted to give them a couple options, and they chose Mary Poppins. And so I listened to A Bear Called Paddington by myself. It's kind of a goofy story. I'd never read Paddington before, and I've never seen a movie of Paddington, so all I know of Paddington is like the image of Paddington Bear. So I had no idea that Paddington Bear was from darkest Peru, where he had lived with his aunt who went into a home for elderly bears or whatever. So it's a goofy story, but funny. I think my favorite part is his birthday party where he gets this like magic set and does some magic tricks. That one was just really funny, but Paddington's always getting into some sort of mischief and not really trying, but he just gets himself into these situations. I feel like Paddington and Mary Poppins were very similar in that they were very episodic. So you could see taking each chapter and it being like an episode in a children's show. So they're not like a long narrative where A goes to B goes to C. It's more like, and today Mary Poppins takes the kids to shop, and today Paddington and his family go to the seashore. So they're not really super connected, but it's more like short little stories within the book. So both of those were like that. And I gave A Bear Called Paddington 4 stars as well. I enjoyed the narration a lot more on A Bear Called Paddington than I did on Mary Poppins. But then again, we've got my whole I really only like British male narrators thing. So it might be completely different for somebody else. And then I read 2 other middle grade novels in June. So I recently read The Crowns of Croswell by D.E. Knight. This is a book that the author and publisher sent to me for review. I reviewed it on Goodreads for her. And I also have the second book, which I haven't read yet, but I'm going to read. This is really cute. So I feel like this is very inspired by Harry Potter in a sense, but I don't feel like it's a copy of Harry Potter, which I think sometimes inspiration strays a little too far. But basically, the similarities we've got here is we have a young orphan girl who is growing up not knowing who she is, and then circumstances happen and she is taken to a magic school. So if that doesn't sound like Harry Potter with a girl, I don't know what will. But there's so many unique magical creatures. The magic system is very different than Harry Potter. The magicians are either royals who have stones that they work magic through, or scriveners, which are kind of like magic scribes. They do magic through quills and things like that. So I really enjoyed this. It was very cute. I liked Ivy, the protagonist, a lot. I don't. Sometimes in middle grade, they get kind of sassy protagonists, and I don't really love that. So I like that Ivy was very sweet. Maybe not always obedient, but she was just a sweet girl. And it's very, very fast paced. And that's a very common thing with middle grade. I would have preferred to take a little more time, but that's okay. This one was really quick read, but it's targeted at kids, so that's perfectly fine. So I did enjoy this story, and I'm looking forward to the second book, and I gave this one 4 stars. The other middle grade novel that I read this month was A Snicker of Magic by Natalie Lloyd. This is one that the girls gave me in a Mother's Day book box. So they created their own book box, and this was a book we already had on our shelves, but they put it in because Charlotte thought I should read it, and she was right. It's a very, very cute story. So there's a young girl in a family, and they return to her mom's kind of hometown. They've been traveling. They're kind of nomads. They don't stay anywhere long, and so they come back to her hometown. And the main character in this really would just like to have a home and stay put. And her mom just tends to wander. And the small town that she's from used to have magic, and all that's left now is just a little snicker of magic. So there's kind of like this whole mystery going on of what happened to the magic and so forth. And so we've got our main character. She collects words. I love that. She can see words around people, and she collects them, and so she writes poems and stuff like that. So she's trying to kind of keep her family together as they kind of all converge on this town, and they kind of have to solve this whole where did the magic go sort of thing. So very cute book. I highly recommend this one, and I gave it 5 stars. I read 2 YA books this month. The first of these I did an entire video for because it was terrible. And this book was called Steal Away by John W. Warnack. I got it at our local library because it is set in our area, very poorly set in our area. It's basically the story of a 16-year-old pop star who escapes his keepers, ends up in rural Colorado, and learns how to be a normal boy because he has amnesia because he was an idiot. Yeah, I have a whole long rant on basically everything about this book, but it doesn't get the setting correct. The protagonist is just an idiot. There's just not a whole lot of likable people in the whole book, so I gave this one 1 star, and I don't recommend it. But the other YA book that I read was On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. Charlotte's in the middle of it now. My husband read it after I did. I just really enjoyed this story. So we've got a young 16-year-old girl who wants to be a rapper. She's got some pretty precarious family situations going on. Her mom is an ex-drug addict and has just lost her job, and they don't know how they're going to make ends meet. And her brother's working really hard, but they're behind on the rent and all sorts of things. So she's kind of throwing herself into her rap at the same time that her family's kind of crumbling and she's having some problems at school. She's such a likable character. She's a little nerd. There's lots of Star Wars references and stuff in here. But she's just so well written, and even when she's doing really, really stupid stuff, which she does plenty of really stupid stuff in the book, she's just a very charming character. So I really enjoyed On the Come Up, and so did my husband, and Charlotte's enjoying it so far. And so I think I might go ahead and check out The Hate You Give, even though it doesn't really sound like my type of book, because Angie Thomas just is a really good writer. So I enjoyed this one. I originally gave this 4 stars. it's been one of those that I went back and forth, but I just recently upped it to 5 stars because I think it just was such a well done story. For adult fiction, I read one book this month, and that was Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I enjoyed this book a lot. I gave it 4 stars. Eleanor is just a very interesting protagonist, and there's not a lot that happens in the book in her actual life. It's just a very kind of mundane life she's living, but she has this series of small things that kind of spiral out of control. And so she ends up having to cling to this friendship that has just developed a lot. And that helps her sort through a lot of her past, because you learn at the very beginning that some bad things have happened in her past, but you don't learn what actually happened to her until the very end of the book, because she herself isn't really sure. She's kind of blocked out what has happened. So I was just kind of blown away by it. My one thing that kind of nitpicky bothered me is that there was abuse in the book, and of course the kids, when the abuse was found out, were homeschooled. Now, to be fair, this mother did seem to actually educate them when she was homeschooling them, but I don't like the whole narrative of homeschoolers equals abuse as a homeschooler. So, other than that, though, it was a really good book, and I really enjoyed it. This month seems to have been kind of a month for memoirs and biographies, so I did read 3 of those this month. Read 2 and listened to 1. The first was Don't Panic, The Official Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Companion by Neil Gaiman. I really enjoyed this because I learned a lot more about Douglas Adams and about the process of writing The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I was not really aware of the timeline of what came first and what came second in terms of radio and TV shows and books and so forth. I have always enjoyed the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. I've read them numerous times throughout my life, but this made me want to go back and reread them again. And I don't think I have ever read The Salmon of Doubt, so that's one I should get to. But I do enjoy the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I enjoy Neil Gaiman's writing, and I enjoyed learning more about Douglas Adams because I honestly didn't know a whole lot about him as an author. So Don't Panic, The Official Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Companion. I gave that one 4 stars. The next memoir was No Limits, The Will to Succeed. This is the one that swam off somewhere in my house. I don't know where it is. This is a memoir of Michael Phelps. So Michael Phelps's memoir, I gave 3 stars to. It was not an exceptionally well-written book. It did kind of sound like Michael Phelps. I know he had a ghostwriter, but I didn't. It was just very I don't know how to describe it. Just very kind of youthful young man, sporty sport sort of tone, which is fine because it's a sports memoir. So, but I just didn't enjoy the tone that much. I did enjoy how it went through all of the 8 gold medals he received, and each chapter was the event, and so it talked specifically about that event and his history in that event and leading up to the games and at the games and so forth. So that was kind of a really good format, I think, for a memoir of a swimmer. So I enjoyed that part of it, but the tone overall I just wasn't a huge fan of. I'm glad I read it, but it's not like an earth-shattering book that everybody should run out and read or anything. And then the third memoir was one that we've been listening to on Audible for a while, and that is All Things Wise and Wonderful by James Herriot, narrated by Christopher Timothy. And this one was a 5-star book for me. I have loved all of these books. This one, I really loved the ending of. I actually loved pretty much the structure of the whole thing. So they aren't super linear stories. It's not like you start when he is a young man first starting out as a vet and you go progressively through the years. It's more like little vignettes. But in the first two, he alludes to the fact that he was in the war, but he doesn't talk about it. But in All Things Wise and Wonderful, he kind of goes back and forth between his time in the RAF, because he ended up in the Royal Air Force, because at the time he volunteered, they didn't need vets. They didn't have cavalry or anything going. So he ended up in the RAF. And so there would be like a story of his time in the RAF, and it reminded him of something in his life at home. So you'd go back to his veterinary practice, and then you'd be back with him at the RAF again. And it also goes over the time when his son was born, because he was in the Royal Air Force at the time his son was born, and has stories of him like sneaking home to see his wife and finding out that his son had actually already been born, but then not having it reported to him for a couple weeks so that he could spend more time with his wife and son after they were back home, rather than going in while they were mostly still in the hospital or whatever. But the very ending of the book, he has been discharged from the Air Force and he's going home. So it was a really good ending to the book. But there's always all those great vet stories in there too. So much humor with the farmers and the animals, and it's just a very fun book to read or to listen to. I do recommend listening to it because Christopher Timothy does an excellent job at these audiobooks. And then the last two books I read were nonfiction, and they were both Catholic books. One I read and one was a lecture series I listened to. So the one I read was Christianity for Modern Pagans by Peter Kreeft. This goes through Pascal's pences, or penses, I don't know how you say it. But so it'll have like Pascal's actual words, and then it'll have Kreeft's reflection on it. So you can see here's Pascal, here's Peter Kreeft's thoughts on Pascal. So I liked this a lot better. I had a hard time with his practical theology. I did not like that book at all. I learned some from it, but I just didn't like it. I liked this one a lot better. I still don't think Peter Kreeft is really like my top choice for Catholic books. He's just harder for me to read than a lot of other authors. So I did give this one 4 stars though. I had lots of good stuff in it, and it was a lot more readable than the last Peter Kreeft. I don't know that I'd be choosing Peter Kreeft without a little nudge from other people. Anyway, so that was that one. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is a lecture series called Great Catholic Philosophers. And this is put out by Now You Know Media, which I had not heard of before we got this book on Audible. But I think we may have another one or two now. It's similar in format to the Great Courses, which we have a lot of great courses, but it seems to be a little more specialized. I really enjoyed this one. The lecturer is Harry J. Gensler, S.J., so he's a Jesuit. I believe he's at Loyola, but I can't remember for sure. And he really likes to hike, so he brings up hiking a lot. And he spent a lot of time comparing people to squirrels, which was funny. But, it was just a very well thought out history of philosophy within the Catholic faith. So from very early on through, this is one that I listened to when I was walking on the treadmill at the gym, because I need to listen to something to keep my brain active when I'm torturing myself at the gym. So it took me a while to go through, because I just do a lecture or two at a time. They're like maybe 25-minute lectures, and I speed them up a little bit, just because it's hard to exercise with slow talkers, and a lot of lecturers are kind of slow talkers. So that was my 12 books that I read in June. If you have read any of these books or are interested in any of them now, go ahead and leave a comment below and let me know. And feel free to like this video if you enjoy reading wrap-ups. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks.